Himna, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so excited to hear from you, learn from you. Thank you for taking the time. All right, we're gonna dive right in. We have about 30 minutes, so I want to start off by, sharing more about you. Obviously, you have really curious. You did a transition from being a three-time national ice skating champion to working with products, as an executive at various companies. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. And hello, everyone. It's such a big pleasure to be here. And one of the things that I've noticed in life is that career paths are non-linear. And in many cases, I think, at least when I was growing up, I had the idea of the first job that I had was going to be the stepping stone for a career in the function that I had chosen. And in my case, I've seen that careers are built almost like with chapters of books where you learn something that is not just about the function but about yourself, and then you build on top of that to figure out what are the things that you like the most and what is going to be your next chapter. In my case, yeah, I could have been an ice skating coach, but then I started learning languages and I got the opportunity to do a exchange program in France. And then I started learning German. So my first job was in an analytics company for supply chain in Germany. And then I realized that I liked analytics, but I didn't like to be in warehouses. So then I shifted into strategy consulting. I started doing a lot of engagements with tech companies like semiconductors, electronics. And that's when I realized that I really like tech and I wanted to come to the US to do that. As always, you need to be scrappy. In my case, I needed to figure out a way where I could come and work here. So I did it through studying in the US first and then starting my career in product. But I have had to do a lot of changes and trade-offs. Like I have this matrix that I always do on what are my values, what are the things that I want to learn, and what are the things that I'm willing to trade off. As a good example, when I started my career in product, I interned at Facebook actually almost 11 years ago. It's funny that I'm back, but back in the day, they didn't allow PMs that didn't have a CS background. And then I had another company, Zynga, that back in the day, we're talking about the CityVille and FarmVille days when it was growing a lot. They actually wanted people that had consulting and analytics background. So I started there because I really cared about the functional learning much more so than the trajectory, almost like from internship you go into a job. So those are the changes that I have had to make in as my career progressed. And I went from only product to leading different functions. I also wanted to understand what it was to manage a P&L. So that's why I went to a general manager role within Intuit. And now I'm coming full circle because the teams that I support at Facebook are not just product, but also engineering, and I support a fairly large function. So it's really fun just to see how you almost like have a backpack of life and you start putting all these experiences, and that's what actually allows you to get to the next role. But don't feel ever pressure about having things right, because it's about one experience at the time that equips you with a good backpack for life.
I love that so much. And I actually need to make a shout out for some folks because you created an actual like Excel model, for how to think. It's kind of like run your life like a product roadmap. And I mean, given the really impressive, both track record, but also just trajectory that you've had, I want to make sure people look and find that because you gave real tools. And then if you could kind of speak to it a little bit, like why do you think, like thinking like a product manager can be applied to your personal life that way or your career?
Yeah. So what Anastasia is referring to is if you Google women in product and my name, Jimena Almendares, you'll find this talk, which is about how to think long term. And I thought the following. If as product people, our skill is to have a goal and then make things happen, why wouldn't we do that for life? I think that in many cases, we go to sleep super late working on the thing that is work related. And sometimes we just forget to actually also prioritize ourselves. So I've always loved Excel models for most everything. And what I did was like, well, how do I think about my life? And how do I think about all of the things that I want to accomplish, both professionally but personally? So I started with a list of 50 goals that I had in life. Then I categorized them by decade where they could happen and by importance, almost like in product where you think about, well, you need to prioritize, right? Like objectives, you cannot do everything. But what allowed me by categorizing them by time is that I understood that I didn't need to do everything now. Like I really aim to be like Iris Apfel, where I'm, the person who does a lot of jewelry and cool stuff in her. I don't know what right now, how old is she? I'm guessing around 90. So I still have quite a few decades to get there. But my point was that there's so many things that I want to do and so many people that I want to be in my different iterations of who I am as a human, that I knew that this decade, it could really be about being an executive. In my next decade, I plan to be a professor, but also an investor, and perhaps double down on social initiatives. And then I'm going to have a jewelry shop. So again, all those things might or might not happen, but it just allows me to know that there are reasons for what I'm doing right now. And at the same time, that doesn't trade off the different things that I want to do in my life, and both personally and professionally.
Oh, I love that so much. There's nothing more powerful than like taking a step back, bird's eye view, giving yourself that perspective that like everything doesn't need to happen at once. I definitely have issues with that. So that's why I wanted to make sure that people knew about that really cool piece that you wrote and talked about and created. So thank you. In the past, you've worked, we mentioned, at several companies that are based on humans and their social interactions: Zynga, OkCupid, Meetup, and now Facebook. What do you see are some ways that our social interactions and product have evolved over time to become more inclusive?
So it's funny that when I started at OkCupid, we didn't have the concept even of several genders and sexual orientations. We had 2 genders and 3 sexual orientations: straight, bi, or gay or lesbian. And we're not talking about a long time ago. I think this was like 2016, 17. And it was crazy that for a product that is about finding your other half, we also had opportunities for people that are in non-monogamous relationships to have their many different halves. But going back to the point of finding the love, it was kind of like surprising that you could not even describe yourself as your true self and then find the right person that would match actually who you were searching for. And I remember that we were about to go through the IPO. And as we were working on how to open the sexual orientations and gender spectrum, actually how the code base was, it was either male or female, like zeros and ones. And as you know, for coding, there's no way, like once you have a binary code, to actually add more than zeros and ones. But what was really nice is that we had a group of queer LGBTQIA people at the company that really believed in this. And I have now decided almost that when you're in product, you have so much responsibility. You have it to the people that you work with, but also the products that you build. And as I was focused on us going through the IPO, I couldn't let go of my values, because what would it say about me and what I stand for if I was only, say, focused on growth for users and revenue and not actually able to come through, which, yeah, obviously there's more genders and there's more sexual orientations than the ones we had. So fortunately, we were able to put a almost like think tank internally, where we had a multifunctional team of designers, engineers, data scientists, and they found a way almost to hack our own internal system. And then we partner with different LGBTQI groups, so that as we were analyzing the different genders and sexual orientations that we could add, it would actually feel that it was something that represented the community well. And it was really fun that we actually launched 12 sexual orientations and 22 gender options, being the very first dating site that had more options. And now it's fun to see that, say, 5 years later, it's pretty common for apps to have more sexual orientations and gender spectrum openness. So that was pretty cool to see. And also what I loved was that when we thought about the product, we actually allowed people to send us their own definition of what it meant to be whatever word they were using for themselves. And then when in the onboarding flow, as you were actually going to choosing your genders or sexual orientation, you could tap into those, and we would take you to this website that was all about the different descriptions that people had. So what was fun is that it was not us saying what it meant to be straight or what it meant to be gender fluid or whatever the word was, but we were actually using the community to say their different definitions to what it meant to be them. So that was a good example of, I think, what it means to put yourself out there and really stand up for your values. Another thing that we're currently doing on Facebook is actually working with the trans community in terms of ID verification when there's a name change. That's something that it's in progress, but it's as I came into this role just a couple of months ago, it's already an initiative that we're working on. So hoping to give you some updates soon.
Wow, that's brilliant to like go back to the OkCupid, a journey that y'all had, for you to be able to make an impact at a company that's like pre-IPO, so obviously like very well known and established and all of that, and like then just open up the possibility for all these other companies, doing similar things to think of that is amazing. I was actually going to say, like, are there any other features that Facebook is utilizing in their products to include the, LGBTQIA community, aside from what you mentioned?
Yes, we just launched in May for Instagram, the use of pronouns in your profile. And as I was reading about it, I'm not leading the launch, but had so many people that would hack accounts, basically put their in bio, their preferred pronoun. So now it's just something that you can just directly add in your pronoun in your bio. And we have released it to the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. And we're hoping to release it internationally very soon. But I think it's pretty cool that we're starting to see profiles that have the right pronouns. And I almost think that that's the right way to go about things, where it doesn't need to be something that people hack. And it's more normal to see that, yeah, you need to define your gender pronoun, because it's not a given that we use, just a binary choice. So I really like products where it's almost like the standard that therefore makes people question whether the way in which we were acting was the right one, or that we can actually have embedded into how we think about products, or in this case, our profiles, the full array of things that express how products should be built for inclusivity, not just for sexual orientation, but many other things.
That's amazing. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for people who, obviously built it into a product. To your point, like, it's hard to sometimes get out of it when it's ones and zeros and it's literally binary. So that it's in a creative job, and I love that. That's so cool. I want to ask you a little bit of a actually personal question, right? Like, how come you've been so open yourself about your sexual orientation in your professional life, right? Like, why are you here in this specific conference today, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've even asked myself, like, how vocal do I want to be? And the very first time I remember having to make the choice was when I was studying in grad school. And I remember that back in the day were a lot of suicides for college students that were in the LGBTQI spectrum. And I realized that in many cases, you don't know what you represent to others. And what I mean is that I knew that a lot of the professors, or even students, my peers that I was studying with, would go back in many cases to their countries, and they would be the ones in charge of making decisions about their employees. And if you ask them, like, do they know someone that is queer, they would never know unless you actually were the person that was almost representing. And I realized that it was my duty to try to be as visible as possible, because there are things that you see about me. You see that I have a Hispanic name. Now you will not see that I'm kind of short. That's what I like about Zoom. I say that I always appear taller than I am. But there's like the things that you see. And then there's the things that you don't see. If you see me walking in the street with my partner who's male, you'll assume perhaps that I'm straight. And it's almost my objective to actually demystify what it means to have, you know, a non-binary sexual orientation. And it's now almost like part of what I try to make very evident when I joined Facebook. I remember that perhaps less than a month in, I wrote this piece about being queer, and a lot of people reached out to me. And what was surprising is that in many cases, you only see yourself and you think that your experiences are individual and personal. But what I think we miss seeing is that there's so many people that are going through the same things, and that just like putting things out there, I would get this email saying like, hey, I'm going on the right in the exact same thing. I remember there was a woman who reached out to me that she was thinking about her sexual orientation, getting divorced, and exploring, you know, having a relationship with a woman. And I just got all of these different emails. So my, I guess, suggestion for a lot of people, it doesn't need to be just about sexual orientation. It can be about mental health or whatever it is that is in your life. Just know that you're probably not the other one. And by you being open about how you've gone through the different changes in your life, you're probably opening up the path for other people to see how the progression was for you, and also for them to be open themselves. And by that, I think we can create a chain effect where we can all just be open, and we don't need to stigmatize any of these things, because on the contrary, they can create beautiful things.
Amen. Thanks, Imina. You know, speaking of kind of the impact, right, that your openness, and then, you know, on top of that, your actual, like, your work in the professional setting has, I think it impacts also a lot like younger generations, right? And you actually do some, you work with O4U, out for grad, or undergrad, excuse me. And I wanted to ask you, you know, from your experience and working with otherwise diverse undergraduates through that O4U, how do the mindsets of like Gen Z folks differ from previous generations?
Yeah, it's very obvious that I think that we're all now searching for meaning. So even when I think about the work that we're doing right now to provide answers and a good user experience to everyone at Facebook and Instagram, as we're building the team, we're really focused on that mission-oriented perspective, that it's all about, you know, service to others, and just building that as a way to express that there's a lot of impact that each single person that now is joining the team can have. And I think that that really resonates. It's funny because I think that for me, and perhaps it doesn't need to be just the spectrum of how old you are, but I think that we're all evolving to just wanting to have more meaning than just like a 9 to 5 job where you're like doing the thing. It needs to be valuable for you as you grow as a person, but also as you think about the meaning of life in all of its capital letters. For the Out for You, if you all Google, is Out for Undergrad. I'm in the board, and it's a group that offers internships and scholarships, I'm sorry, so that we can bring LGBTQ students that are thinking about going into the workplace in either tech or marketing, engineering, or business careers. And we put them in contact with companies that are hiring, so that they at least can see how they could be open about their sexual orientation if they want that in the workplace, but also have companies that are really excited about bringing in you know, people with different gender and identities and sexual orientations. But yeah, it's super exciting to work with younger generations, because obviously they're just telling us what needs to happen in the workplace, which means it needs to be meaningful.
100%. And if we actually have some, like, maybe undergrads or soon to be grads in the room, do you have any like information about how to apply for the upcoming O4U conferences?
Yes. So Google Out for Undergrad, and then you'll see we have a link for applications. You can get a scholarship so that you can even, hopefully soon, as we will have again live conferences, you can travel to the places where we will hold those conferences. This year, we're doing them remotely. And also, if you work for a company that might be interested in hiring more students, there's also a contact form to do that. And once you're actually part of the community, you could also become a mentor, or you could help organize a lot of these conferences. They're pretty large, but it's also the impact that we have by bringing in at a time 200 to 400 students. It's pretty special, because you're basically allowing people to have a lived experience that they might not have otherwise, right at the time when they're about to transition and open, see the opening of opportunities that they could have in their career. So it's something that I'm super excited, because I think that sometimes it's not that people don't have talent, it's just that they don't know how to access those opportunities. And we're really trying to create the bridge between talented people and companies that want talented people.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that people will kind of look up more information on that on their own time. But I wanted to shift gears a little bit to ask you a question about you as a leader, right? And a leader of diverse teams, multinational teams. Do you have any advice or best practices for leading teams who operate in different countries, whether that's like how you hire or work with those and lead those different cultures?
So it's so interesting that for me, having an international career happened because of where I studied and then the different jobs that I had. And I think it's a very valuable experience for people to think about working abroad or traveling, because it just gives you more openness, not just towards new experiences that you will have, but also that probably your user bases, if you're working in product, are going to be from people around the world. So just having that sensitivity towards how you think about your users, it doesn't need to come from a, say, US-centric perspective. In my case right now, I've been pretty lucky that I've always have had some type of international experience, both as I was living abroad, but also now building new teams. Like right now we have 200 new open headcount for the team that we're building. We're building it in London. And it's pretty fun that once you know that people have different approaches to work, like even right now we were making this document and the spellings, they change, right? So do you go in a US spelling or a UK spelling? Also, people are a little bit more reserved. And I think that one of the things that has I've been able to gather from traveling so much is just having empathy to understanding that there's many ways in which people collaborate. There's also different ways in which people are. Some of them are related to the culture in which they grew or the country in which they lived in. So I guess my TLDR there is that, as an example, one of the big things that we're focusing right now is culture and onboarding and creating principles so that people feel included. And how do we do that? By only having meetings, say, at a time that it's friendly between different zone times, but also creating principles so that people write things and they don't feel excluded if a meeting happens at the time when they're sleeping. So we don't need to go perhaps into full detail of those, but my main point is that your own experiences in life as you'll travel, perhaps even think about working in a different country, will probably allow you to be a much more inclusive person in the workplace. And over time, as you start managing people, to actually create that space that allows everyone to feel part of a team, no matter which country they're in.
Agreed. There's nothing more powerful than like exposing yourself to those experiences and situations. So I know we have to run, but I want to ask you one more question before we move on really quickly. You are a globetrotter, not just professionally, but like again in your personal life. So lastly, what's the 50th country you're looking forward to visiting when you can soon?
So I thought that I was going to reach 50 countries last year, then COVID happened. And now I haven't even thought about whether I'm going to reach the 50th country. I think that if I can, I would love to go to Cuba or Thailand. It's kind of crazy to me that I haven't visited either of those countries before, but I think that now I think less about like the milestones and more the experiences. And one thing that is really important for me is my family. So now I'm always thinking about what are the places that I can go discover with my parents and my partner, so that it's less even just about the discovery, but it's much more the journey that we're all going through as we travel as a family and experience new things together, given that we all live in, my parents live in Mexico, I live here. So it's always really fun to think about travel as a way to bring the family together.
I do the same because I do a lot of travel too. I love hearing that. Imna, thank you again so much for being with us for this half hour. It was so wonderful to hear your story and hear you open up. I really, really appreciate it. And I know a lot of folks on the line who are listening are too.
Thank you all. It was such a pleasure talking with you, Anastasia. And also hello to everyone. Pleasure being here with you. And bye-bye.